From issues with mould to leaks to the unsafe cladding that led to the Grenfell tragedy, there are constantly corners being cut. Data shows that approximately 4.7 million private renters have battled mould issues at their homes in the past year, and complaints in 2021 were almost double that of the year before, with the Ombudsman receiving over 3,300 complaints. Now, according to charity Citizens Advice, over 1.5 million kids in Britain, in this day and age, by the way, are living in cold, damp or mouldy homes that just cannot in any way be right. Delighted to be joined by Suzanne Muna from the Social Housing Action Campaign Group. Obviously, Russell and Carol still with me. Suzanne, if I could start with you. Welcome to Jeremy Kyle Live. Thank you very much, Steve, for coming on. Why are housing associations, seriously, in 2023, for God's sake, in the fifth richest nation in the world, allowed to get away with having these, the mould? It's proven fatal. Why are they allowed to get away with this? Why is more not being done?
Well, first of all, there's a massive problem with access to justice. It's very, very hard for tenants and residents to be able to take complaints anywhere and get them dealt with seriously. A lot of it rests with the landlord themselves. So if they're not interested, they just won't respond. And then you have to wait a few months. You have to go first through the landlord's complaint process. Then you can go to there's your options, the Ombudsman. You could try and take it to court, but all of those are absolutely fraught with problems. Not least, legal aid has been removed from most housing issues, so you can't get legal aid.
Sorry, hold on a second. Legal aid's been removed from people from this country moaning because their rental properties are covered in mould, but you can get on a boat and come to this country and get legal aid in a heartbeat, yeah?
You could, well,
Wow.
I don't want to comment about people being able to come and get legal aid, but certainly it's very, very difficult for people to get legal aid with their housing problems. Can I just add to that as well? One of the really big scandals is that a couple of years ago, a few housing associations got together, led by Riverside, and lobbied government for a change in the law that even where people do win disrepair cases in court, they can't claim back their legal fees. So this was a way of trying to put off no win, no fee lawyers from taking up these cases. And government actually changed the law, but they haven't enacted it.
Isn't it interesting? You describe a rental system, and we're talking about unscrupulous landlords. They're given free rein, aren't they? You're talking about a system that says, you can buy a huge number of properties, probably with mortgages that you can't afford now anyway. It doesn't matter what condition they're in. We're in such a housing crisis, people will be forced to live in them and actually, can lose their lives. And there's no control over that. That's appalling, Suzanne, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that's why we exist. We wouldn't exist if these problems didn't exist. So it is an appalling situation. There's been a real tilting through a deregulation of the sector, through changes in legislation. There's been a real tilting of the power almost completely now in favour of the landlord and away from tenants and residents. So rents can go up. Rents can go up massively. We have a massive issue. You mentioned some of the problems. One of the biggest problems we get reports of is service charge abuse, which is where their service charge statements are riddled with inaccuracy, but the law expects that you pay it and then have the argument afterwards.
Well, we're going to talk about that later in the show, because we've got a case of a woman who just cannot even believe how high that's gone. Has anything from your point of view, and you talk about how your charity, Fair Play to You, exists because of these problems, has anything or nothing changed since the Grenfell tragedy? Because that shone an absolute light on the problems that exist.
What we have seen is an increase in tenants and residents working together. Coming through, SHAC is a grassroots organisation. We organise people, they determine what they campaign on and how they go about it, and we give them the support to do so. So what we seem to have lost in this country was a housing movement as such, where people were kind of creating that power themselves to be able to fight back against these bad landlords. And what we are seeing is a rise in that kind of self-organisation that is going on. Obviously, in our view, that's a really good thing, because that's where the start needs to be made, with people being able to actually get justice. But we do need legislative changes that give tenants and residents a lot more protections, a lot more ability to hold landlords to account. And we also need to see government holding these massive landlords who get millions of pounds of public subsidy, actually holding them to account, because God will stamp his foot and criticise them.
Just one question, Suzanne. I'd like you to stay on when the other two join in. Just to explain, and I wanted to ask this question anyway, do private renters have different or the same rights as council tenants? What is there a difference, or is all as one?
Some of the rights are the same. There are some legal rights possibly that apply specifically to very specific types of renters. For example, shared owners who own part of their home and also lease rent part of it. So tenants so it's a mix. So you get some variation. For example, it's only leaseholders, but not tenants and residents, regardless of tenure, who are allowed who actually have a legal right to see the statement of the charges that they pay. The others don't have a legal right, so it's up to your landlord whether they decide to share that information with you. So there is definitely some divide and rule in the way that the law applies across different tenures.
Suzanne, stay there for now. Thank you. Don't go nowhere. Carol Lewis, property editor at The Times, here with Russell Quirk. What does the government need to do? This is appalling. This is absolutely appalling.
This costs the NHS 1.4 billion a year. Cold, damp homes.
It costs the NHS that's skinned. There we go. We're at it.
And it's not that expensive to treat. For every £1 you spend treating a cold, damp home, you get £4 in health benefits. So cost-benefit analysis, you have to do something.
Am I missing the point? Increasingly, I think I must be politically. In the last sort of few months, as we gear towards this election, it seems to be a soundbite every single day. And no doubt this will end up be something that Sunak wants to do something about, and Starmer as well. But nobody's had the foresight to do anything about road landlords for years. Why?
I think there are registration processes for private landlords which are trying to tackle this. In our experience of writing about this issue of damp and cold and substandard housing, it's often the housing associations that just will not respond to the tenants. They will send people out. They'll just keep sending people out who don't do anything.
Because they're not bothered.
Kicking the can down the road. Because they're not bothered, because they don't want to spend the money, I guess.
Russ?
Legacy of Grenfell, now that that's been mentioned, you know, there are still something like 500 blocks of flats across Britain that have not been remedied, that right now have unsafe and cladding that's effectively still a fire hazard 6 years on. So that the government have absolutely dropped the ball in that respect. When we talk about landlords, though, I think that we do need to be careful to differentiate between what we call registered social landlords, so they're housing associations, and private landlords. Now, believe me or not, most private landlords are not big corporations with hundreds and hundreds of properties. They are people that have bought 1, 2 or 3 properties for their retirement, and they are generally, 99% of them, very, very good landlords and very good people. Where it's gone wrong, I think, is that those housing associations, those registered social landlords that were actually set up by government, they're a public sector body, there's about 1,500 of them, by the way, they effectively have taken the place of the council. So they've allowed councils to abdicate their responsibility for social housing. And the housing associations, largely, not all, have become entities now that are more interested in building houses for profit and actually paying their CEOs £200,000, £300,000, £400,000 a year. If you don't believe me, look it up. And the other thing that I think is something that we really need to focus on here as part of the remedy is that there is a very, very cosy relationship now between councils and planning authorities and housing associations.
Is that true?
So, and I'm just going to suggest, if we join the dots, a council who is actually responsible for better homes standards, so it's the council that should go in and make sure there's no mould, there's no electrical issues and so on. I suppose if we were to join the dots, you could not be surprised that the council doesn't want to be the entity that goes to war against the registered social landlords and housing associations that it's in bed with. So call it a conspiracy theory if you like, but that cosy, warm relationship does not help when it comes to enforcement on mould and people living in substandard conditions.
Go back to Suzanne, Social Housing Action Group, heading that. Suzanne, let's be constructive on the show. If a tenant has mould, what rights, what do they do? How do they go about dealing with something that is abhorrent? I mean, absolutely abhorrent. You shouldn't be able to rent somewhere that's got mould.
No, and I think what we would say to people is to actually get that information out there and campaign about it. Talk to your local press, form a group with your neighbours, and go and visit the landlord. You can pick it, you can demonstrate outside the landlords. You really need to be making a noise to get them to take notice of it. There are the sort of procedures, like I say, going through the landlord's complaint process, and also then going to the ombudsman. But these are processes that take months and months and months. And we find that actually if people get together and campaign and make a noise, they can often get a result much, much quicker and really sort of expose what's happening, whatever the issue is, whether it's disrepairs, whether it's rents, whether it's service charges, you know, all of these issues, you really have to be a squeaky wheel. And then we also need to all come together so that we do get a change in the legislation that gives tenants and residents a lot more protection.